A narrow stretch of water between Iran and Oman can affect gas stations, shipping costs, fertilizer prices, and grocery bills around the world. That sounds exaggerated at first. It is just a strait on a map. But the Strait of Hormuz is one of the most important energy routes on Earth. Huge volumes of oil and liquefied natural gas move through it, and when markets think that flow could be disrupted, prices can react far away from the Gulf itself. In this video, we are not looking at the Strait of Hormuz as a breaking news drama or a political argument. We are looking at it as an everyday systems story. This is really a video about geography, trade, shipping, fuel, fertilizer, and how one narrow route can connect a local place to global daily life. Once you see how it works, the Strait of Hormuz stops looking like a faraway regional issue and starts looking like one of the hidden pressure points of the modern world. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow waterway between Iran to the north and Oman to the south. It is the only sea channel connecting the Persian Gulf with the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea beyond. In simple terms, it is the doorway between the Gulf and the open ocean. The route is deep and wide enough for the world's largest crude oil tankers, which is one reason it became so important in the age of energy shipping. If you look at a map, the logic becomes obvious immediately. Countries around the Persian Gulf can load ships at Gulf ports, but to reach the wider Indian Ocean and then customers in Asia, Europe, and beyond, those ships have to pass through this narrow exit. That makes the strait less like an ordinary stretch of water and more like a bottleneck built by geography itself. Why geography made it important? The most important thing about the Strait of Hormuz is not just that it is narrow. It is that it sits in exactly the wrong place to be ignored and exactly the right place to become essential. The Persian Gulf holds some of the world's major oil and gas exporting states, and Hormuz is the passage that links those exports to global sea lanes. When a lot of valuable cargo has to move through one narrow route, geography stops being background scenery and becomes part of the global economy. That is why people often call it a choke point. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, choke points are narrow channels along widely used sea routes that are critical to global energy trade and security because such large volumes pass through them. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the clearest examples in the world. A short history of why this route matters. The Strait of Hormuz did not suddenly become important when oil tankers arrived. Long before modern energy markets, the wider Hormuz area mattered because it sat between the Persian Gulf, Arabia, India, and the Indian Ocean trade world. Encyclopedia Iranica notes that Hormuz was already important to Indian Ocean trade in the late pre-Islamic era, and that by the 10th century the town of Hormuz had become a chief port for major regional trade. In other words, the route mattered before the oil age. Oil just made that importance much bigger and much more global. In later centuries, the region kept drawing outside attention because whoever influenced this gateway could influence trade. In the modern era, that old commercial importance merged with the rise of oil exports. By the 20th century, and especially after Gulf energy exports expanded, the strait became one of the world's central energy passages. During the 1980s tanker war, shipping in and around the strait was attacked, which showed how quickly problems in this route could become an international economic concern. What a maritime choke point is. A maritime choke point is basically a narrow place that a lot of ships need to pass through. Think of it like traffic funneling from a wide highway into a much tighter lane. Most of the time, traffic still moves. But when something slows, blocks, or even threatens that passage, the effects can spread outward fast because so much depends on it. That is why choke points matter even when nothing dramatic is happening. Their importance comes from dependence, not just crisis. The Strait of Hormuz is a textbook choke point because it concentrates enormous energy flows into one narrow maritime corridor. That means even a perceived risk there can move markets, shipping decisions, and insurance costs, because traders and carriers know there are only limited ways around it. How oil, gas, and shipping move through it today. This is the scale that makes the strait so important. The U.S. Energy Information Administration estimates that in the first half of 2025, total oil flows through the Strait of Hormuz averaged about 20.9 million barrels per day. That was about 20% of global petroleum liquids consumption and about 1/4 of total global maritime traded oil. In the same period, 11.4 billion cubic feet per day of LNG, or over 20% of global LNG trade, also transited the strait, mainly from Qatar. Those are not just big numbers. They tell you that this route is built into the everyday functioning of the energy system. It is not only about crude oil. Refined petroleum products move through it too, and LNG matters because natural gas is deeply tied to electricity generation, heating, and industrial activity in many countries. A lot of that energy heads to Asia. EIA estimates that 89% of the crude oil and condensate moving through the strait in the first half of 2025 went to Asian markets, with China, India, Japan, and South Korea as the top destinations. But that does not mean the rest of the world is untouched. Oil is a globally traded commodity, and price movements spread through benchmark markets, shipping contracts, refinery economics, and transportation costs well beyond the countries that buy the cargo directly. Why it affects fuel prices, fertilizer, transport, and food. The easiest place to see the connection is fuel. The U.S. Energy Information Administration explains that retail gasoline prices are mainly affected by crude oil prices and the amount of gasoline available to meet demand, and that crude oil is the largest component of the retail gasoline price. So if a route carrying around 1/5 of global petroleum liquids becomes riskier or more expensive, that can feed into oil prices, and oil prices can feed into what drivers pay at the pump. The next link is shipping and transport costs. UNCTAD says global shipping moves over 80% of world merchandise trade, and it also warns that political tensions and reconfigured shipping lanes can affect shipping costs and routes. That means problems in key maritime corridors do not stay neatly inside the shipping industry. They can raise the cost of moving goods, delay schedules, and put pressure on supply chains that seem unrelated at first glance. Then there is fertilizer. The World Bank notes that natural gas is the most critical cost component for nitrogen-based fertilizers, and FAO and OECD have warned that higher fertilizer prices can raise food costs. So when a major LNG and energy route comes under strain, the effects can move beyond fuel and into farming. Farmers face higher input costs, food producers face higher operating costs, and ordinary shoppers can eventually see some of that pressure in food prices. It does not mean every grocery item jumps overnight. It means another layer of cost enters the system. This is why the Strait of Hormuz matters to people who may never buy Middle Eastern oil directly. You do not have to live near the Gulf for the effects to reach you. You just have to live inside a world where fuel powers transport, natural gas supports fertilizer production, and goods move through a tightly connected shipping network. What alternatives exist and why they are limited? A common question. Can't ships just avoid the Strait of Hormuz? The answer is only partly. Some oil can bypass the strait through pipelines, especially in Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. But EIA estimates that the Saudi East-West pipeline and the UAE's Abu Dhabi pipeline together could provide about 4.7 million barrels per day of bypass capacity in a disruption. That is helpful, but it is far below the 20.9 million barrels per day that moved through Hormuz in the first half of 2025. That is the key point. Alternatives exist, but they are limited. They can reduce some pressure, not replace the strait completely. This is why the route remains so important even in a world with pipelines, storage, and multiple suppliers. geography still wins a lot of arguments. Myth versus reality. Myth: it's just a regional issue. Reality: the strait is geographically regional, but economically global. A large share of world oil and LNG trade passes through it, and oil prices ripple through global markets. Even countries that import little directly from the Gulf can feel the effects through fuel prices, shipping costs, industrial inputs, and general inflation pressure. Myth: if there's trouble there, it only affects oil countries. Reality: it affects far more than oil exporting states. Crude oil is the biggest component of gasoline prices. Natural gas is a key input for nitrogen fertilizer. Shipping disruptions affect the movement and cost of goods. So the impact can reach truck fleets, farms, factories, supermarkets, and households far from the Gulf. Myth: if it closes, the whole world instantly runs out of oil. Reality: that overstates it. The more immediate risk would be a major supply shock, price spikes, rerouting, and costly scrambling for alternatives, not every country going dry all at once. Some bypass capacity exists, but only for a portion of normal flows, which is exactly why markets would still react so strongly. The problem is not that oil disappears from the planet in a day. The problem is that a huge share of trade is suddenly harder, slower, or more expensive to move. Why ordinary people should care: most people do not need to memorize shipping lanes or tanker volumes. But it helps to understand that modern daily life depends on hidden systems, and the Strait of Hormuz is one of those systems. It connects geography to energy, energy to transport, transport to farming and manufacturing, and all of that to household budgets. When people say a place matters to the global economy, this is what that really means in practical terms. The bigger lesson is that the modern world often looks stable only because certain narrow routes keep functioning. We tend to notice the supermarket shelf, the gas pump, or the delivery truck. We do not always notice the strait on the other side of the world that helps keep those things normal. The Strait of Hormuz matters because it is one of the places where the global system is visibly narrow. So, what is the Strait of Hormuz? It is a narrow waterway between Iran and Oman that links the Persian Gulf to the open ocean. Why did it become so important? Because geography placed it at the exit of one of the world's major energy-producing regions. Why does it matter to normal people? Because enormous amounts of oil and LNG move through it, and changes in that flow can affect fuel prices, shipping costs, fertilizer costs, and eventually food prices. And that is what makes the Strait of Hormuz such a powerful everyday topic. It is not just about maps or headlines. It is about how one narrow route helps connect the global economy to ordinary life. If you understand that, you understand something important about how the modern world really works. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe. Then tap the bell icon to turn on all notifications so you never miss any of our future videos.